I think India is a very unique country and we are blessed to have so many handicrafts to begin with. I think our strength really lies in the local culture that every region, every village, every tribe exuberates. But post the COVID era, I think the pressure across the globe on doing the right thing is so high for not just the corporates but for individuals, that individual social responsibility has become the norm now. So it is my individual responsibility to wear the mask so that I don't become a transmitter if I'm COVID positive, or your responsibility to wear a mask so that you do not end up inhaling uh, uh, possible particles which are there in the air.
Hello, ma'am. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Hi Mishika, I'm good. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. I'm so glad to have you, and I'm very excited to shoot this episode with you.
Finally, we make it happen.
Right. So, how's the lockdown been going for you?
It's been quite a roller coaster ride, I have to say. As you know, that I delivered my baby in Jan end, and soon after, so he's been born in the COVID era,
Okay.
and for us, the entire lockdown period has been really taking care of the baby, ensuring that we're all safe. A lot of the effort has been actually to get vaccinations done on time with the lockdown, ensuring that we find the pediatricians, which has been very difficult initially, especially in March and April. But thankfully, so far so good, and we've been able to manage within the lockdown the constraints that we have. So my entire lockdown, my energy has been on my maternity leave, really.
Right. So, it's been challenging for you.
Yeah, I mean, anyways, being a new mother is not easy, and then to
Right.
be a new mother without any help is another challenge altogether. We had a baby Japa initially, who subsequently had to leave because her term got over. But for us, it's been quite a learning curve for me and my husband. It's the two of us in the house, so obviously with the new baby, the two of us, without any maid, without any cook, without any nanny, just managing by the two of us, with the two of us now, I think it's a great learning curve for anybody, any which ways, but for us even more so because it's a new baby, a new routine, and we're just learning skills that we've never had before with the baby.
Right. So, I think it would be appropriate to say it's a new experience every day.
Oh yeah, totally. I think we figured out a routine. I have to. I'm pretty amazed with the way we all are so agile when it comes to when push comes to shove. So we figured out a routine. We figured out a way to be. We are able to manage quite a lot of things. But I have to give credit to my baby as well. Touchwood, he's a happy child, so it makes a lot of things much easier compared to what I hear from other new moms. So yeah, I mean, you appreciate all small little incidents that happen in a day and how difficult it could have been. But thanks for the happiness that the baby brings, the aura that he has around him, that we are able to manage pretty decently despite the lockdown, despite the fact that we have no help, and it's a new phase altogether.
Beautiful, ma'am. So, something which I really want to talk about in this podcast is about the communities associated with the traditional handicraft, and
Yeah,
something which you've worked a lot for.
yeah,
So, especially in this given the current situation, they've been suffering a lot. So, where do you
yes.
say Indian handicraft stands now, and where do you see it after the post-COVID?
See, Mishika, to be very honest, I think India is a very unique country and we are blessed to have so many handicrafts to begin with. I think our strength really lies in the local culture that every region, every village, every tribe exuberates. For us, it's really important to celebrate what we bring about locally. And that's where, also my passion for the handicraft and the handloom sector really came about. wherein I really wanted to understand what pottery really entails, and I started my journey to learn pottery from a national award winning potter. Um, and that was also the beginning of my journey with my own foundation, Soch Foundation, which stands for Solutions for Clean and Healthy Environment. It was conceived with a very clear cut thought that we're going to marry making handicrafts sustainable and ensuring sustainable livelihood for our artisans, and as much as possible eliminate the middlemen in the process. It was a learning journey. I have to admit, I realized you cannot eliminate the middlemen. You need to have somebody who does the marketing and the supply chain for the artisan, because that person, he or she, cannot do everything under the sun. But what can be made possible is the equitable distribution of the price point that the craft really sells for the artisan. So yeah, I mean, honestly speaking, it's been now about five to 6 years that I had learned pottery. 5 to 6 years of Soch Foundation, 5 to 6 years of working with potters on the ground. Giriraj ji, Bhuvnesh Prasad ji, their family, Anguri Devi ji, all of them are award-winning potters, and with them we co-created kilns which were eco-friendly or energy efficient, so that when the pottery products are baked in these eco-friendly kilns in and around Delhi, they do not emit emissions and particulate matter in particular. Given that 2016, 17, 18, we've seen how much havoc air pollution
Right.
has really from Delhi particularly. Somewhere we were a little ahead of the curve, so we started our journey in 2015, 14, 15, around then. And that's not the time when, so much of importance was given to air pollution, and then bang, in 2016, it was making headlines. So we were a little ahead of the curve, and that's when we were trying to convince the potters to take up the solution, which was also not so expensive. But subsequently, what we've realized is that every artisan, a traditional artisan, has his or her own journey and family history of doing things in a particular way. And we co-created the solution, therefore, with the potters community, so that they are able to adapt to it better. Um, I still have hope that we will be able to make inroads into the potters community, where they're able to adapt to eco-friendly kilns much more than what it is at the moment. But with COVID, what has happened with some of the artisans around Delhi, be it the Katputli colony, be it the Potters colony in Delhi, be it, all the melas, the Dilli Hearts, and the Dastakar Heart, etc. Everything that used to happen, the avenue to be able to sell the product has really gone. People are not getting out to buy the products,
Right.
and that supply chain being affected adversely has impacted the livelihood of a lot of artisans in the long run. The good news is that as we see more importance being given to vocal for local, people like you, me, and a lot of Indians really want to buy indigenous products and indigenous craft. Therefore, you also see a surge of the masks with, made of gamcha, which is hand woven,
Right.
made with, the barley art, or made with Madhubani painting, and therefore people want to buy these kind of masks which help the livelihood creation of some of the artisans. But COVID has been a pretty tough call for the artisans on the whole, I would say, and in general for people in the semi-urban rural areas where livelihood has been impacted very badly. We've seen how in the urban space itself, the migrants have gone back, right? And mind you, every migrant, somewhere or the other, leaves behind a legacy of culture in his or her own village, right? Where also exists the legacy of these handicrafts. So I think this is just the right time where we can give a lot of push and impetus to our Indian handicrafts and help these artisans to thrive in these very difficult times. And I think I'm very happy to also learn and see a lot of people are trying to help them in a very big way. People are trying to help them with marketing on Facebook, do fundraisers for them. so that, and I know that in our personal capacity, both me and my husband, we are still continuing to help the artisans at the local level in Delhi, the potters community especially. So it's something that has been a hard hit for the artisans, but I'm hopeful that they would be able to bounce back, provided people like us continue to support them.
Very true. So it is just my assumption. I may be wrong in this. So while you were on your way to work with the Potters community, were there any obstacles like in the form of like the Potters not wanting to shift from the conventional way of doing their business?
Yes, of course. I mean, Mishika, come on, let's face it. Even with air pollution in Delhi, how many people would really wear masks? Till
Right.
the time it come to a situation where there was COVID and it was a life and death situation, and everybody thought this has become a pandemic that's also somewhere a little scary for the psyche. Did people really start wearing the masks, right? So behavior change is very difficult. Even for people who think they are very educated and intelligent, it is very difficult. Even with the lockdown easing out in some places, we're still seeing people not adhering to the kind of norms that we had, right? There are still instances of people not wearing the mask. So behavior change by its very make is a very tough space to operate in.
Right.
Therefore, to understand that, you cannot ask a traditional artisan to change his or her habit overnight. It needed constant demonstration, it needed constant hand holding, it needed a lot of subsidy for them to be able to adopt the new practices. And that's where I say it was a great learning curve for me and my husband. What we ended up doing is creating the prototype successfully and running it with Girirajji and Bhuvneshi and Anguriji's help in their own their own space. So they actually gave us their pottery area to create those kilns and conduct trials there. We ended up
Okay.
also getting certifications done by laboratories on the emissions happening, and about 75% of the emissions came down. So our prototype was foolproof, ready, successful, still is ready, successful. So as a pilot that Soch had to do with us putting in our own money, we did it with the potter community. We did it, or rather, let me say, we did it with the forward-thinking potters like Girirajji, who we co-created the kiln with. Right, we married the traditional ideology, got a scientific know-how from another partner called Stenum Asia, and married the two into a scientific kiln which can really bring down the emissions. The potters, of course, I think over a period of time would be able to adopt to it, but it needs subsidy, which is where a lot of policy level work and work with the government organizations also needs to be done. A lot of CSR money needs to be pumped in, sorry. And also, I think it also needs a larger awareness. See, it's very easy to put the blame. So in Delhi, for example, धुआं आ रहा है, भट्टे से आ रहा है, कुम्हार की कॉलोनी से आ रहा है. It's very easy to put the blame on somebody who's not that powerful. But you can't yourselves probably stop emitting emission from your fuel guzzling vehicle, for example, if you have one. So that's where behavior change needs consistent, persistent effort. And I said in the beginning, we were ahead of the curve. We did things which were a little ahead of its time. And then right after my baby was born, we had full-fledged plans of working with the potters community and mainstreaming these skills. But the pandemic, like, we all know this, how all plans have been stalled. But definitely, I'm again hopeful and extremely optimistic that the potters are willing to change. They have seen the need to change, and they want to make that shift. We need to support artisans and indigenous communities as much as possible to help them evolve from traditional means and making them more sustainable.
Right. So I see a lot of localization of SDGs, which is very important in my view to achieve them by 2030. And as you
Yes.
also stated, the role of CSR. So, what, according to you, is the role of CSR and the partnership between the corporate and the social sector in order to let India achieve the 17 SDGs by 2030?
See, again, I think it's very important to understand that corporate social responsibility at the end of the day is something that a corporate has to do or does before the COVID era, somewhere because it was mandated by the law, somewhere because the corporate was very forward thinking and they understood that they have to take the community along with them to be able to sustainably grow and bring in the shared value, right, for all stakeholders. But post the COVID era, I think the pressure um, across the globe on doing the right thing is so high for not just the corporates but for individuals, that individual social responsibility has become the norm now. So it is my individual responsibility to wear the mask so that I don't become a transmitter if I'm COVID positive, or your responsibility to wear a mask so that you do not end up inhaling uh, uh, possible particles which are there in the air if at all you come in contact, so on and so forth. So we are in an era now where social responsibility at a community level itself becomes very, very critical and important. And corporates have the means to be able to influence a larger behavior change. Therefore, so large corporations end up having their products reach to millions of households, right? So if their products are made ethically, if their products consume less resources, if their products are, helping solve some problem of the community, then obviously they are able to help achieve the SDGs far more faster than what can happen at an individual level. As an individual, you and I may want to consume products which we know have that backing, which is
Right.
environmentally friendly, socially conscious, ethically produced, has a positive impact on the planet, also in the journey, it's purposefully done, so on and so forth. The CSR right now is very critical in the sustainability journey of, I would say, forget just India as a whole, for the entire country, for the entire world. And people who are driving CSR therefore become even more important because you need to be able to make those connections and connect the dots to see the larger picture. It is not about spending the money and meeting the government mandate of CSR norms. It is really about making a larger dent wherever you're operating, whatever you're producing, whatever service you're offering, to make sure that it is in no ways harming the planet and has a positive impact on the society.
Right. So, in your professional career or the experience you've had working in CSR, what is that one project you've seen which has created a lot of impact and which was perfect in all ways?
You mean to ask if there is a project that I think was always perfect?
Yes, and which has been able to create impact around that.
I mean, I'll be very honest with you. I don't think there is just one project that comes to my mind. And I don't know how to define perfect or perfection really. But there are of course projects that I admire. There are companies that I admire for doing the work that they do. And there are a few examples that come to my mind. And they're from different sectors really, Mishika. I mean, if you look at the sports space, which typically under CSR is not something that a lot of corporates touch. Then there are companies like IndusInd Bank who are doing some great work with sports people in India. If you look at water conservation space, then I know there are companies like Unilever and companies like Ambuja Cement Foundation that are doing some great work in water conservation space. If you just talk about social responsibility, the first name that comes to you is a Tata's, right?
Right,
I
right.
mean, we all know that Tata's have been a very, very ethical company. And some way or the other, even when one is a student and one learns about responsibility, it is always some of these organizations that come to the forefront. I think there are some companies who have very brilliantly also married biodiversity conservation in their entire sphere of operation, and Tata's is one such company. Godrej is another example where they work a lot on biodiversity conservation. So I think within CSR space we have these pockets of excellence where we have some great examples of good work that organizations are doing. There is a lot more than every organization can do, right? And synergies that one can draw with each other as well as the government in achieving the larger mandate. So therefore, I can't give you one example of perfect from the beginning to the end, but I think one has to be very clear that responsibility, the work responsibility is constant action. It is always work in progress. It is not one day I do something so perfectly and I forget about it. It cannot be like
Right.
that. And in this day and age, it has to be something that we're constantly bettering, constantly learning from, and constantly evolve as we go along in the long run. So yeah, I think CSR and each of these examples that I gave you, mind you, are very directly impacting the SDGs as well. So they are looking at, the Niti Aayog aspirational district indicators as well as SDG work that's happening at a larger UN level. So yeah, these are some CSR examples that come to my mind.
Okay, like along with the CSR, you also spoke about the individual responsibility we all have. So, how can you think we can um, bring in sustainability in our everyday lives and the small actions we perform every day?
I think, Nishika, it's very, very important to first take a little bit of a backseat and understand yourself as a person. I don't want to give global yarn of save water and save electricity. We all know that, right? I think behavior, again, it's about individual behavior and how is it that we prepare ourselves first as an individual. We all right now need to take a little bit of backseat and understand what. See, the easy answer for this, of course, would be that we all need to save water, save electricity, etc. That's something that you and I both know. Everybody knows. But behavior change, like I said, is the key, and that's the difficult part to do. It is very, very important for us to therefore take a back seat and look at myself first as an individual. How is it that I perceive myself as an individual? For example, in my life right now, with the new baby in the pandemic times, am I conscious enough on the kind of choices I'm making for my baby that can have a positive or a negative impact on the environment, right? So if I'm choosing diapers, what kind of diapers am I choosing? How much of diapers am I choosing? I have to take care of my baby's health as well. The planet is pretty much like that. And responsibility, like I said, is work in progress, pretty much like that. You got to make this world, your home, your family, your loved ones, your extended society like your own baby, and then think about the choices you're making for that baby, whether you want that baby to grow up with happiness around, and how is it that you're defining happiness, or whether you want it to be life as usual, business as usual, and be sloppy about your choices. It's absolutely up to you. The moment you realize what you're choosing, this or that, I think your path would be very clear in the individual responsibility that you're fulfilling. You would make sure that in this pandemic time, you definitely maintain the social distancing without a reminder. You definitely not let the guards down when the situation becomes a little better. You do not make the mistakes of taking easy route, of not following all the norms that have been set out during this time, and make sure that every day is equally hard. I mean, I can say this, and I hear so many people cribbing and crying about domestic help, and trust you me, at this point of time, if somebody needs a domestic help, it has to be a new mother more than anybody else, because there's just so much to do. But still, it's a hard choice that my husband and I are taking. And very soon I would be back to work, and very soon I would have to have a routine where I'm working while the two of us have to manage the baby as well. It's a choice.
Right.
And how is it that you fulfill that choice is where individual responsibility really comes in. I think the rest of it, for example, in this pandemic, if you've not been able to call electrician because of the pandemic and your AC needs a repair, I think people have learned to live without ACs as well for some point of time, right? earlier before the pandemic, if you would ask somebody in the peak of monsoons in Bombay to live without an air conditioner, it would not be possible. So these are the examples which have happened and emerged, Mishika.
Yeah. So something apart from these actions and choices we make, something which I believe in fostering dialogue, which further leads to action in young minds. So how do you think we can foster a healthy dialogue about the SDGs at a school level or at a say a higher school level?
I think that's a very interesting question. And the example that comes to my mind is that my own foundation has a program called Nature's Jamboree.
Okay.
And Nature's Jamboree is celebrating through art, culture, and literature, environmental sustainability, and bringing home the message of SDGs. I think in the 3 years that we ended up hosting Nature's Jamboree competitions, these were a series of competitions held across schools. We ended up producing actually books written by school children, wherein on SDGs there are paintings, poems, essays, doodles. And these books are published and are available on Amazon as well. And every time we had these competitions, we just didn't want it to be yet another competition that a child participates in and forgets. Therefore, the idea of really documenting some of these points that a young mind really captures when he thinks of, say, SDG 13, climate action, what comes to mind? Or 14 and 15, which is on biodiversity and life on earth and life undersea, underwater, or ecosystem services. What is it that comes to a young mind's imagination? We wanted to capture all of this, Mishika, and we've seen some beautiful results coming out of the conversations we've had in schools. We've also held a lot of workshops for this, and it's been very heartening to have these conversations at school level, because what a young mind at this point of time thinks is actually far more responsible than what adults are thinking. And I think individual responsibility, a lot of times the behavior change in any household is actually driven by a youngster in the house rather than the elders in the house. And that's where a lot of linkage, see, we're not in a linear world anymore, it's absolutely interconnected.
Right.
So your individual responsibility, your official responsibility, your SDG agenda, your young mind conversations and advocacy, all of this is actually, imagine, infused in one house. These are all influences coming in a single house where there's a father, a mother, or grandparents and siblings and a young toddler, and everybody coming together, bringing in their own influences. That's where I think individual actions with a lot of behavior change advocacy and dialogue with the young and across spectrum can lead to SDGs being fulfilled uh, by 2030. But it's not really all about individual action, as simple as we are making it sound. Of course, there's a lot that at a systemic level work has to be done. The government has to work at a particular level. The corporations have to work at a particular level. And then individuals and communities have to work at a particular level. And within communities comes the layer of sustainability being very different, say, for rural and peri-urban areas, for artisans, for migrants, versus what sustainability means for people like you and me.
Right. So regarding this, like you spoke about achieving the SDGs by 2030. So I was talking to a couple of guests, and my question to them was, it's 2020, and we still face issues like racism, gender inequality. So uh, uh, is it really possible that we achieve the SDGs by 2030? So their answer was very simple, which was that the Generation Z and the millennials are the most empowered generations we've ever seen. So they were very positive about achieving these changes and the goals, which is something which really spoke to me.
I'll tell you very honestly, I think what we've, and this is something that personally have a problem with in sustainability discourse and dialogue. We always talk about the future generations. Yeah. I'm sorry, it's not about the future generations. It's about now. It's
Right.
about right now. It's about this generation. It's about all the generations that are existing on this planet right now. We all are impacted by climate change. We all are impacted by the pandemic. We all are suffering because of something that happens in one pocket of the world which is not sustainable, right? Future generation comes much later. It is really about the now and this moment. We have to seize this moment. So while the millennials are empowered, please let's also talk about how have they been empowered, and how is it that they are going to be channelized in a manner that sustainability comes home. And that channelizing and that empowering of the young mind is going to happen by previous generations, right? So
Right.
if a youngster like you today wants to start a business which is sustainable, responsible and social inclusive, and has a positive impact on the environment, you would obviously look for capital and investment, right? And that investment would possibly come from somebody who's from my generation or even older. So therefore, we all across generations have to work together in making sure that by 2030 we are able to achieve what we are aiming to achieve. If we do not work together, and somebody in the 60s thinks that the youngsters are going to do it, the youngster thinking those guys in their 60s are actually to blame because they created havoc on the planet, it doesn't work like that.
Right.
Just as we say collaboration is key between different sectors, which is private and public, or at a community level, at an individual level. Similarly, I think intergenerational camaraderie is very important. I love talking to youngsters, to be very honest. I think it's one of the best learning curves that I get, simply because they are buzzing with ideas. But what they often lack is direction. And that's when I understand how a young mind thinks. And we're able to navigate, I think, the conversation into a beautiful solution that can lead to something meaningful in a very concrete manner. And through Nature's Jamboree, by the way, I'm going back to Soch Foundation's initiative, but through Nature's Jamboree, we were able to achieve that. We got some brilliant ideas as well as pledges from the young minds, where we realized that we've triggered a thought process where these people actually want to take some action locally to be able to create a solution in some of the local problems that they face. So people, actually students, ended up reaching out to me asking, I don't want that tree to be cut in my colony, what can I do? So the young mind has the power of wanting to change the world. I think one quote which is always stuck in my head is from Amitav Ghosh's book Shadow Lines, and it says romanticism of the youth demands that we do things differently, and it's brilliant. I think the youth are always in that romantic place where they think that I will change the world.
Yeah.
That we need to tap into. We need to tap into that sentiment, but it needs to be married with the wisdom of other older generations who have seen a lot in the past few decades. Understand also what climate change is, by the way. So we look at climate change over a period of 30 years at a bare minimum, right? In those 30 years, in my living lifetime, I know how things were when I was younger to how things are when I'm in my mid 30s, right? So it's the marriage between the generations that will lead to solutions, and these solutions will help in SDGs being achieved in the long run. That's how I view it, at least.
Right. This is a very thoughtful and wise aspect I've heard of, the interconnection and the two generations working together.
See, I mean, I think I'm just going to take back to our conversation as well. You're so young. You're still studying
Right.
in Delhi University, and I'm a Delhi University pass out, right? We both are a DU product at the end of the day, but just through this conversation, there's a connection on just a simple interest point, which is sustainability and SDGs. And this has triggered a thought process in my head as much as, it would have triggered a thought process in your head. And possibly the fallout of this could be something much more meaningful and not just an interview that we are having right now.
Right. So this brings me to the last question, the final question of the podcast, which is the standard and which I'm very excited for. So are you ready for that?
Yes, please ask me.
Yeah. So the question is, what is the best advice you've received, be it in your personal life or your professional life, which you would capture into a 5 to 7 word presentation title?
Wow, nice. Okay, so I think the best advice I've ever received in my life actually comes from my parents. And I will be creative about it. I will tell you what the advice was from both of them, but I will try to be creative in the end and maybe make it into a presentation title. So, my father always believed that you have to stay true to your roots. You should never forget where you come from. You have to stay humble and you have to be true to your roots. And perhaps that's why for me, the whole potters community thing happened क्योंकि मैं literally मिट्टी से जुड़ना चाहती थी. And it's a little poetic in a way, you know, you guys are doing mitti, mitti ke rang podcast CDs. So there's a lot of mitti connection happening. And the other advice that I really got was from my mother. And we were very young, me and my sister, and she very clearly said that if you want to succeed in life, there are two kinds of managements that you need to know. One is time management, and the other is money management. If you do not respect your time and money, you will never be successful in life. So I think these two advices clubbed together into a presentation title would perhaps sound something like a grounded person's time and money management.
Right. That is very thoughtfully and beautifully captured from both of their ends.
I'm not too sure how creative was that at the end of the day, but yeah, I think these advice this advice has completely been my core for all these years that I've been in my personal and professional capacity been working.
Right. So thank you, ma'am. It was so lovely to have you, and so such thoughts shared and so much wisdom shared. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Mishika. Thanks for triggering my thought process, and more power to you and MKR team. I think you guys are doing great and continue to do all the good work that you guys are doing.
Definitely. Thank you, ma'am.